Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Sunday, August 1st, and we're breaking down this 10-game day slate that we have over on DraftKings today, and I'm thinking this is looking like a pretty good slate here. The pitching isn't overly expensive. I think there's a couple of options here that do make sense, and their price points are pretty good, and they have some pretty solid matchups. And as far as offenses go, there's some pretty good expensive and inexpensive stacks today, so I feel like we can kind of go any direction we want. Just depends on what kind of roster construction you're looking to build today. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. It's a free and easy way to help show your support to the channel. And if you don't follow me over on social media, you know where to find me using the handles in the bottom hand corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, get access to some extra content, which includes my entire spreadsheet here. It's all color-coded nice and neat so you know what's good and what's bad. And it has pretty much all the data you'd ever need. My projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets with core plays, and goes position by position and all that fun stuff. Discord community. Link is down below for that. I do cover other sports as well, including the NFL and NASCAR. It's also the best time to sign up because it's the first of the month, and if you don't know how Patreon works, that's when you get your best bang for your buck. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's Daily Fantasy Sports Simplified. Just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. Whether you want to take Vlad over 1.5 hits plus walks or over a certain amount of fantasy points, you can check it out. It's really fun to use, and if you look hard enough, there's some pretty soft lines to take advantage of. And as of right now, if you're a new signee, you get a free money bonus up to $100. That's an instant deposit match up to $100, so it's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you? But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And I gotta say, the past few weeks now, pitching has been a bit shaky. It's really hard to trust these good pitchers, so just tread a little bit lightly here. But we'll start up top with Charlie Morton, $10,200. By projection-wise, he's my favorite pitcher in the slate here. He does a pretty solid matchup versus Milwaukee. They're a strikeout-heavy team. And yeah, they do walk quite a bit and have a little bit of pop versus righties, but Charlie Morton's a guy with decent strikeout upside. I will say this is a pretty good park for hitting, and the hitting weather has been pretty solid recently, so it's been kind of hard to roster pitchers in this game. But I still think Charlie Morton's a solid option here. The Atlanta stack does look pretty good, so I think as long as he can go those 5+ innings, he'll be able to pick us up that dub. There's a 4 implied team total against him. He's a slight favorite here, 6.5 K prop. And if we're looking at his numbers on the season, they have been pretty solid. 3.5 xFIP, kind of the same with Sierra, 3.7. 27.7% carry. Does walk a little bit of guys, 8.6% walk rate, but at least that comes with the 10.5 Ks per 9. Doesn't give up much power either, which is good. 106 ISO given up, only a 28% fly ball rate, less than a 30% hard contact rate, and less than a homer per 9. And if we're looking at the Brewers splits versus right-handed pitching this season, nothing overly impressive here. 25.5% K rate. They do walk quite a bit, like I mentioned, but only a 157 team ISO. 303 Wellbone and 88 WRC+. So while I realize this is going to be some pretty good hitting conditions, once again, around 90 degrees and humid, like it always is in Atlanta in the summertime, but I think Charlie Morton should still be a fine option as long as these strikeouts are there. And then dropping down to some potential SP2s here, we have Jose Berrios, $8,600, new addition of the Toronto Blue Jays here. I wouldn't say it's my favorite matchup in the world versus KC. They're not really that great of a team, but they don't really strike out too much either, but I don't think he's going to give up too many runs here. Only a 3.9 implied team total against him. He's a pretty heavy favorite. The Blue Jays stack does look pretty good tonight. I don't have a ton of them listed on the sheet just because they're super expensive, but obviously if you have the money for them, go ahead and stack all the Blue Jays that you want. I think they have a team total like around 6.5 today, so obviously it's a pretty good spot. And as for Jose Berrios, the guy's just a solid pitcher. He was pitching well recently before he got traded. Got around a 3.5 xFIP this season, 3.74 Sierra, actually very similar numbers to Charlie Morton. He's also around $1,500 cheaper, 25.7% carry, doesn't really walk too many guys. Doesn't give up too much power, 153 ISO, which is a little bit up there, but it's nothing overly concerning. Does have lean to the ground balls, 33% hard contact rate allowed, and only 1 homer per 9, so I don't really think we're going to get into too much trouble here with Jose Berrios. I wouldn't say he's as good of a DFS pitcher as he is a real-life pitcher, but the guy's been still fine this season. He has been pitching pretty well. And as far as the matchup goes, KC is kind of an annoying team. They're really not that great, but they don't really strike out too much either, which can limit your upside. Only a 22.1% K rate, but they don't have much power. The WRC plus is pretty low. The WOBA is kind of similar to the matchup for Charlie Morton, so I think at his price point, he makes for a fine SP2 option here. And as long as he can go those 5+ innings, I'd be very shocked if he can't get us that 4-point bonus over on DraftKings for the win. And if we need some cheaper options here, we have Jordan Montgomery at $7,400, and he's actually been playing some pretty good baseball recently. He draws a fantastic matchup versus Miami on the road, which They traded some of their best players in Adam Duvall and Starling Marte, and that lineup looks really weak right now, and they only have a 3.3 implied team total here. He's a slight favorite, 5.5 K prop, and while his numbers aren't overly impressive on the season, I do like the recent form, and the numbers aren't too bad. The xFIP is below 4 this year, in the low 4s, close to a 25% K rate. Doesn't give up much power, and this Miami team right now has pretty much zero power whatsoever. Has a lean to the ground balls, only a homer per 9, low hard contact rate allowed, and this is one of the best pitchers parked in baseball. And like I said, there is just really not that many great bats left on this team. Yes, I know Jazz is back, but it is looking really rough for Miami right now, and they only have a 28% K rate versus lefties on the season, a 140 team ISO, a 291 WOBA, and 85 WRC plus, and most of these numbers are accounting for Starling Marte and Adam Duvall being in the lineup all season, which both those guys have some pretty good splits versus lefties. So you take those guys out of the equation, this is a very bad offense versus lefties right now. So I think Jordan Montgomery at that price point is a very good option. This is one of the lowest implied team totals on the entire slate here. It might actually be the lowest. Actually, I think it is, because I don't really think any other team besides Miami would be lower than this. So I think Montgomery is an excellent option here at that price point. Then if you need to go even cheaper here, we have Cal Gibson, $6,900, a new addition to the Philadelphia Phillies here. I'm not the biggest Cal Gibson fan, but at this price point, facing Pittsburgh and a pitcher-friendly park over there, I think we have to at least talk about him because it's a real cheap price point. He could easily be one of the better point per dollar option pitchers on the entire slate here. Obviously, he's not a big strikeout guy, and Pittsburgh's not a team that'll strike out too much either, so we're probably only looking at like 4 to 6 strikeouts here at Cal Gibson, but I think he should be fine in the run prevention category, and the Philadelphia Phillies have a pretty good matchup versus Pittsburgh today in Keller. So as long as he can go this 5+ innings, like I mentioned with the other pitchers, he should be able to pick up the win here, and that could go a long way below $7,000. The one thing I've been talking about Cal Gibson all season long is that his ERA looks really good. It's below 3, and earlier in the season it was like almost below 2 for a little bit. But his xFIP and SIERA are about 2 runs higher in the 4s and 4.5 here. Only a 20.5% K rate. He does walk quite a few guys, close to 9%. But he limits the power, he gets a lot of ground balls, limits the hard contact, and limits the homers, which is fine. It's a good matchup here versus Pittsburgh. They're a team that has pretty much zero power whatsoever, with only a 135 team ISO on the season, 89 WRC plus. Kind of similar to the Royals where they don't really strike out too much, which is kind of annoying. They can kind of be a bit pesky there, which kind of limits your upside. But still, from a run prevention standpoint, at this price point, I think Cal Gibson certainly becomes in play today. And I think that's pretty much it for the pitching for the most part, so we'll move right over to the bats. And we got quite a few good spots to talk about today, but we'll start up top with the catcher position. Looks like we can spend down here. Obviously, if you want to spend up for an expensive catcher like JT Realmuto or something like that, I have no issue with that, especially if you do spend down for pitching today. But I do have some cheaper options listed here. And we'll start with Pedro Severino, $3,000. He always has some pop versus lefties. Tyler Alexander isn't the absolute worst pitcher in the world. I think his ERA, xFIP, and SIERA both around 4.5, which isn't terrible, close to a 20% K rate, but he's not that great of a pitcher, and I think we can certainly use righties against him. And the Orioles, surprisingly enough, do grade out very well versus lefties. Like, their splits this season versus lefties are actually not that bad whatsoever. So I don't mind the Orioles stack today. They have a team total close to 4.8 here, and on the road, you get those guaranteed nothing at bats. I wish they were at home. Canyon Yards is definitely a better place to hit, but I do think the Orioles are looking like a pretty decent stack today. And Severino does have some pop versus lefties. Cal Raleigh here, $2,600. The Mariners have a team total of 5 today versus Mike Folty, which he's not the worst pitcher in the world, but he will give up plenty of hard contact, power, and homers to left-handed bats. I do think the Seattle Mariners, especially the lefties, do make for a decent contrarian stack today because I don't think a lot of people are going to want to play the Mariners on today's slate, but they do grade out pretty well. And Cal Raleigh's a decent hitter versus right-handed pitching. And then Kevin Smith here, if you want an absolute free option, $2,000. Righty and lefty matchup here versus Anderson in Atlanta, which the Braves have been really hot recently. They've been hitting very, very well. It looks like the weather conditions are going to be pretty favorable to hitting today. So if you want to do a stack for the Atlanta bats, preferably the righties, I wouldn't mind that at all. Now, Brett Anderson's kind of an annoying pitcher to stack against because he's got a good ground ball rate. He's not exactly that bad, but I think we can definitely use some of these Atlanta righties today, and their price points aren't terrible either, so I do think they make for a decent stack tonight. And then dropping down to first base, if you have the money, we have Vlad, $6,300. I don't have a ton of Blue Jays listed here just because of their price points, like guys like George Springer, Teoscar Hernandez, Marcus Semien, and a couple of other guys. Yeah, they're fine options today, but they're mainly if you're just full stacking the Jays and you have the money for them, but just as one-offs. I mean, they're kind of pricey to make that work, but I'm sure you can if you want. But anyway, Vlad, it's a good matchup here versus Brad Keller and the Kansas City Royals, although I will say Keller has not been that bad recently, so maybe we should stay a little bit careful here, but they still have one of the highest implied team totals in the slate, around 6.5, and if you got the money for Vlad, it's never a bad thing to pay up for him. And then Trey Mancini here, $5,000. I'm almost more tempted to play Trey Mancini today over Vlad because he's $1,300 cheaper, and I like that Orioles stack quite a bit today. And Mancini's been very good versus left-handed pitching this season. If we're looking at his splits versus lefties, he's been crushing it. A 295 ISO, over a 400 WOBA, 295 batting average, 158 WRC plus. And these numbers are actually better than what Vlad's doing versus lefties this season. Not saying Trey Mancini's better than Vlad, but Mancini's been very good versus lefties this year, and I really like that Baltimore Orioles stack today. And then his teammate here, Ryan Mountcastle, $3,400. Not quite the numbers of Trey Mancini, obviously, but he does have some decent pop versus lefties. Over a 200 ISO in the season, 324 WOBA, and a 462 slugging. So if you can't quite afford Trey Mancini, his team at Mountcastle batting cleanup right behind him looks like a very good option at a much cheaper price point. Then dropping that to second base, there was absolutely no value bets that I liked at this position today, so it looks like we have to spend up a little bit. But we have Ozzie Albies here, $5,100. I always love him versus lefties. He has very good splits versus them, and looking at the numbers this season, he's only got a 12% carry to lefties, a 300 ISO, 417 WOBA, and a 340 batting average. Like I said, Brett Anderson can kind of be a little bit annoying, but favorable hitting conditions here. Atlanta's been hot, and I always love using Albies versus lefties. So even though he's a bit expensive, I think it's not going to be that hard to fit him in today, considering the pitching isn't overly expensive. And dropping on Jeff McNeil here, $4,900. I think the Mets are an interesting stack today. Now, he's the only Met that I have on here just because of the ballpark that they're in. If they were in Cincinnati, I'd probably have like the entire Mets lineup on here because it's a great matchup versus Vladimir Gutierrez, but team total of 5.09 here, which is not bad. It's just I hate kind of using bats in Mets Park because it's obviously going to be favorable to pitching, but Gutierrez is not a good pitcher. He's got like a 15% K rate, double-digit walk rate. The xFIP and SIERA numbers are right around 5. He's just not that great of a pitcher, and I know he kind of settled in his last start after he gave up a 2-run shot, but I mean, you can certainly use Mets against him, although they're just not my favorite, but in tournaments, you can certainly target these guys. But to be honest, at second base, I really just want to try to get up to Ozzie. And Jonathan Schoop at $4,800. I prefer him versus lefties, but Spencer Watkins is not a good pitcher. And the good luck finally ended for him last start because I was talking about his numbers where he had like an ERA of like 1.5, but his xFIP and SIERA were close to 6. Like, that just is a big indicator that regression is coming. And it finally hit him last time out. And if we're looking at his numbers on the season, his ERA has now risen to 3.10, which does not look that bad, but his xFIP and SIERA both are above 5.5. 16% K rate, double-digit walk rate. I mean, the guy's just not that great of a pitcher, and I think these Tigers are definitely going to be in play once again. They have a team total above 5.2 today, and the Orioles bullpen is obviously not that great. Then dropping into third base here, I was kind of struggling to find any third baseman that I like today, so I just kind of picked some power options here that I think have home run upside today. So Jose Ramirez, $5,500. Not a big fan of the Indians today, which, look, I'm an Indians fan, so it hurts me to say that, but this offense is just bad right now. There's a couple of good bats here, and I have the 2 good bats on here, and Jose Ramirez and Franmil Reyes, but besides that, it is a very gross offense right now. Like, they had Miles Straw leading off, and then they had Bradley Zimmer leading off the other day, so yeah, times are tough in Cleveland, but Jose Ramirez, if you're just hunting for a homer, he has been crushing right-handed pitching this season with over a 300 ISO. And I'm not that scared of Reynaldo Lopez, even though I can't expect him to last too deep into this game because his pitch count has been very low in recent starts. And then Kyle Seager, $4,600. I briefly mentioned the Mariners when I was talking about Cal Raleigh at catcher, but Mike Folty is the guy that will really struggle with left-handed bat, well over a 200 ISO and over a 40% hard contact rate. And Kyle Seager, while his batting average isn't obviously that great, he does have some decent pop versus right-handed pitching. And Austin Riley, $4,400. He's kind of been harder than the sun recently, and like I said, I like the Braves, specifically the righties versus Brett Anderson here. And if we're looking at his overall splits this season, he's got around a 200 ISO, 276 batting average, 358 WOBA, and he does get a good amount of fly balls. I think Riley at $4,400 is certainly a fine option today. I could see him being pretty high owned just because the Braves have been hitting pretty well, and they do have a team total close to 5. Then dropping at a shortstop, there's a couple of good spin-up options like Bo Bichette, who I do have listed on here. Tim Anderson's another good option. Javier Baez versus Gutierrez. But I didn't want to just put 3 expensive guys here, so I landed on Bichette just because they have the highest implied team total here, and he's been awesome all season long. But you can use whatever one you prefer, or whoever you're stacking. If you're stacking White Sox, obviously go Tim Anderson. If you're stacking the Mets, Javier Baez, and so on. You think you guys get the idea, but, you know, Toronto Blue Jays look like the best stack as of right now. So I put Bo Bichette on here. His numbers have been great this year, batting close to 300, 185 ISO. I mean, no complaints here. If you had the money for him, great. If not, don't think it's the end of the world. Dansby Swanson, $4,300. If you are stacking the Braves, and Dansby Swanson's been awesome recently. He's obviously not the biggest power guy, but he did have a grand slam, and he's batting .275 on the season. Hits a little bit lower in the order now since they made some moves, but I still think he's fine at that price point. Then Ramon Urias, $2,900. He is dirt cheap. I could see him being decently popular today. He's just okay versus lefties, and the price point's fine for a team that I have a lot of interest today in the Baltimore Orioles. I mean, obviously, he's not that great, but a guy that's betting $275 below $3,000 is not a terrible option in my opinion, point per dollar wise. Then dropping down to the outfield, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to play the expensive outfielders like George Springer, Teoscar Hernandez, Juan Soto, Bryce Harper, be my guest. I don't love any of those ones really above the rest, so I didn't want to put them on here. I don't want to talk about 10 expensive outfielders, but if you got the money for one, great. And I was playing around with roster construction and actually found myself being able to afford guys like one of those guys in each of my lineups. So just kind of pick your favorite. If I had to like rank those guys, I'd say the Blue Jays outfielders would come first, then probably Bryce Harper and Juan Soto, but kind of take your picks there. But we'll start with Cedric Mullins here. It's a lefty and lefty matchup, so I feel like people might overlook that. But if you're full stack in the Orioles, probably a mistake to leave him off because at some point he'll see a righty and he's just been very, very good all season long. And I think this is a pretty fair price point for him. They do have a team total close to 5 here, so I think he's a fine option. I'm hoping people skip over him because in tournaments I do think he's a pretty solid play. Adam Duvall, $4,400, recently shipped back to Atlanta here, and he's got plenty of power, especially versus lefties. He gets a lot of fly balls, and he's got a 256 ISO on the season. It's definitely a big park upgrade going from Miami to Atlanta, so I do think he's a pretty solid option there if you're kind of hunting a homer. And Akil Baddoo here, $4,200. I know I've been talking a lot about the Orioles, but I do think the Tigers are another really good spot here. Team total about 5.2, which is actually one of the highest on the entire slate. It's actually still higher than the Orioles here. And Baddoo, he has just been excellent versus right-handed pitching this season, batting around 300, close to a 400 WOBA and a 275 ISO with a 155 WRC plus. So I do think Baddoo is a fine option at that price point. Franmil Reyes, $4,100. He has been crushing the baseball. Not scared of a matchup versus Reynaldo Lopez. Now, I assume they're going to see a lot of the bullpen here, but Reyes has been excellent. He's got over a 300 ISO on the season. I realize this Indians lineup is looking really bad right now, but I think a couple of options like Jose Ramirez and Franmil Reyes are good if you are going home run hunting in this lineup. Then Robbie Grossman, $3,500. I prefer him versus lefties, but like I said, I like the entire Tiger stack here, as I do look pretty good versus Spencer Watkins. And then to close this out, we have a couple of dirt cheap options here on the Orioles versus Tyler Alexander. Both these guys have some decent pop versus lefties. And Austin Hayes might be one of my favorite value bats in the entire slate, because if we're looking at his splits versus left-handed pitching this season, he's batting 326 with a 382 WOBA, 217 ISO, 145 WRC plus, and only striking out 14% of the time. So at $2,700, I think that's a really good home run spot for a guy that is below $3,000. Then Anthony Santander, he's the bare minimum at $2,000, and he's kind of a similar play to Austin Hayes. He's got some okay pop versus lefties. Now, I do want to mention there's a couple of other 2K guys, like Andrew Stevenson I still think is $2,000. Bradley Zimmer, I believe, is the bare minimum. Ben Gamel is close to it, and Rafael Ortega, who's been playing well, I want to say is like $2,500 or $2,700. If you wanted some other options there, I think those guys are fine, but I really do like those Orioles outfielders. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. Follow me over on social media if you want, ChrisPennell16 on Twitter and CPen16 over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, right now is the best time to do so since it is the first of the month. You get access into my entire spreadsheet, my projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, all that fun stuff. Link can be found down below. And I don't just cover baseball, I do NASCAR and the NFL, then NBA once that season begins. So that definitely won't be anytime soon. And don't forget this video was sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's Daily Fantasy Sports Simplified, just you versus the projections. As of right now, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. It's an instant deposit match up to $100. It's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you? Either go to prizepicks.com or use the link down below. But I think that's pretty much it, guys. I will stop rambling. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. Hopefully the weather is wonderful wherever you are. And I'll see you on Monday for the next video.